Alberta.
My name is Janet Fletcher, and most of you know me from the dining car. I am your dining car steward, and I've worked on Via Rail for almost 30 years now, and I've worked in all the positions and all the cars except for as a chef. And so I thought I'd give you a little bit of an overview here of the area that we're traveling in. To be honest, I wasn't watching out the window exactly where we are, but this little portion of track is kind of fascinating. We're all waiting for the mountains to show up, but there's some cool stuff that happened here. And this is a bit of an international story. We're going to start way back when they built the first railroad in Canada, and that was the Canadian Pacific Railroad, which most of you are familiar with, and that was strategically built down by the North American border. It was not the easiest railroad to build because they went through some very tough terrain, and they've got the world famous spiral tunnels where you go in the bottom of the mountain, yes, and come out the top. They're absolutely phenomenal. And I think it's the longest tunnel in the world, which is over 5 miles. And imagine the 1800s, blasting through a mountain like that was very difficult. So flash ahead a bit in around the turn of the century, the other railroads were coming through Canada, and they were coming up. We had the Great Northern Railroad coming through across Canada, and we had the Grand Trunk Pacific. Great Northern Railroad was building up through here, and there's a group of people, and they had a dream. They wanted to go right across through Canada and to the port of Vancouver. And there is another group of people, the Grand Trunk Pacific, the GTP, also known as the Get There Perhaps Railroad, and they were building across the prairies at that time. And an American came up. His name was Charles Melville Hayes. We went through Melville yesterday, you'll remember. It was named after him. And he was an American, and he went to Laurier, our Prime Minister at the time, and he said, you know, I have a dream of building grand hotels like the Canadian Pacific Railroad all the way up to the port of Prince Rupert, and I would like them to be like the CP hotels. And the government said, sure, lots of room, go ahead. So through this territory, I'd be lying if I said I knew exactly which railroad we're on. We'll say it's the Grand Trunk Pacific. They built along here. Wherever you see a highway beside us, that was the Great Northern Railroad, which is now Yellowhead Highway. They were that close together. And why this portion fascinates me so much was that it was a great turn in our Canadian history because the government sent out tutors to tutor the railroaders, or the people building the railroaders. So they had people coming out to teach them the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. But the funny part of the story at the time was that these railroads were side by side, and they were really naughty. They would go over and sabotage each other's equipment and, you know, light fires and do all sorts of nasty stuff to each other. So there was a lot of tomfoolery going on. And at one particular point, and as I mentioned, I wasn't paying attention where we were, but we'd gone over some very tall ravines, you might have noticed. And I can't remember, I think it was the Great Northern guys. They came to that ravine, and they wanted to be first through this territory before the Grand Trunk. So when they got to the ravine, it was winter time, and they thought, oh, we have to build a bridge here. So instead of building a bridge, what they did, so they could get ahead of the other guys, they took apart their work train, every nut, bolt, and screw, put it on a sled, down the ravine, up the other side, rebuilt that guy, and off they went, so they could beat the other railroad with their things. So what happened to them all? Well, Mr. Melville Hayes, the American, here's your international story, he went over to England to raise money for his dream of great hotels to build up to Prince Rupert. Well, he did something no good railroader should ever do. He took a boat back and he picked the Titanic. So Mr. Hayes went down with his dream in the Titanic. Eventually they did finish the Grand Trunk Pacific all the way to Prince Rupert. Their last spike was driven in 1914, but it didn't go with the Grand Hotels. Great Northern guys, they fussed and fought and carried on so much they finally went bankrupt. So the government stepped in at that time, and they amalgamated the two railroads, the Grand Trunk Pacific and Great Northern Railroad, and it became one, and that was Canadian National Railroad, the CNR, also known as Certainly No Rush Railroad.
Alberta, Alberta, oh Alberta, Alberta.